What's going on, everybody? Nick from the Sound Coop here, and well, in case you missed it, guitar-related YouTube has erupted over the last couple of weeks at the knowledge that the input level we're sending into our guitar amp simulator plugins actually matters quite a bit if you're trying to achieve some level of accuracy. And the unfortunate thing is the problem is actually quite a bit larger than everybody is telling you, and so we're going to get into that. I think what I want to address here is I want to address the problem specifically. I want to address why the problem is actually bigger than a lot of people are saying. And luckily, I'm going to provide a super simple and easy solution. I'm going to try to get this all done pretty quick. Now, for those of you who love the technical details, once we get past those three things, I'll sort of lay out the technical reasons why things are the way they are and sort of how we got ourselves in the situation to begin with. So to try to lay out some kind of a timeline, on the 6th of January 2024, John Cordy put out a video entitled "The Problem with Plugins." If you don't know John, he's got an awesome YouTube channel. He's a killer guitar player. I highly recommend you check him out. I'm going to put his videos as well as all the other videos I reference all below so you guys can watch them. Basically, what John was pointing out was a lot of people are recording their DI guitar signals into their DAW so hot that it's causing them accuracy problems with their plugin. Apparently, the current trend is to record your DI as hot as possible into your DAW without causing any clipping. There's no reason why you should do this, and this is definitely not the way you should be handling input levels into your DAW, but we'll get into that more later. About 10 days later, on the 15th of January, Rhett put out a video, and he did a great deep dive going into this further, and he kind of went as far as to show how hot levels going into a plugin make it not really sound all that great, and if you go a little bit quieter, you get better accuracy and you get better tone out of your guitar amp simulators. Then a day later, John put out another video, and he basically went through a very similar thing, kind of showing how to make this process better, sort of presenting some solutions. Now, just one more point of reference. In watching all these videos, it seemed like all of this came up at a recent roundtable with a bunch of YouTube guitarists, where they were discussing this. I believe Tom Quayle was in on this, John Cordy was in on this, Rhett was in on this, and they basically, during that discussion, brought up this problem that people are having with plugins. And seemingly all of this relates back to a YouTube video done by YouTuber Ed S. I'm going to put a link to his video below too. He, back in May of 2023, was kind enough to sort of bring this problem to everyone's attention, and he's done a real deep dive in terms of figuring out what various plugin manufacturers recommend as far as your peaks when sending them into your guitar amp simulator. So thankfully, he did a lot of the legwork to help people get a better idea as to how they should be handling this. Now, really quick, let's just talk about why this problem is actually bigger than everyone is alluding to, and then we'll get to the solution, which will be quick and easy. The problem is bigger because it doesn't just include guitar amp simulator software. From my point of view, this problem is going to occur with any sort of piece of software that you're using inside of your digital audio workstation that happens to be modeled after a real-world piece of hardware. So guitar amps are real-world pieces of hardware. Guitar cabs are real-world pieces of hardware. Who's using the Slate virtual microphone system? That whole mic system was built off of models of real-world mics and preamps. So that's all real-world gear as well, too. Your favorite 1176 plugin, that's modeled after a real-world piece of hardware. All your favorite tube EQ plugins, same thing with those. So it's not just guitar amps that are going to have this sort of effect. It's basically anything that's modeled after a real-world counterpart. I do think that most plugins built into DAWs or that aren't modeled after real-world hardware probably operate in a more linear fashion, so you don't have to worry about the input level quite as much. There might be some exceptions to this, but the basic gist is the input level you're sending into your plugins is going to matter if those plugins are virtually modeled after a real-world physical unit. So let's get to the solution. The solution is, there's no reason to record hot into your digital audio workstation. Now, that statement can seem vague. What does too hot mean? Well, I think the rule of thumb that I use when I'm trying to set my peaks properly in my digital audio workstation is I try to keep my peaks somewhere between -18 and -12. And I think that's just the simple solution. If you look at the chart that Ed S. created, it seems like most of the manufacturers want their peaks somewhere between that range. And admittedly, the manufacturers are all a little bit different. I think one of the solutions that was presented is we should get manufacturers to standardize the peaks across all their plugins. And I think this is a great idea, but it's sort of like asking Ford and Toyota to standardize their engine gaskets. It's just probably not going to happen. Don't get me wrong, it will be helpful, but I think it's kind of wishful thinking because these plugin companies are all doing their own thing. So while I was doing the editing, it occurred to me that maybe it would just be easier if I showed you guys what this looks like in a DAW, so I'm not just telling you guys. So let's have a look at my computer real quick. All right, so this is a little pre-production I'm doing for a song. I recorded some guitar parts just so I can build out some other instrumentation. I'm running a guitar rig. I'm using one of their Marshall simulations just for some demo stuff. Here's my actual guitar channel over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play the track as I've recorded it. Let's just see what my levels look like. All right, so you see my peaks right there? That's -15 and that's -10. According to my Pro Tools, if I refresh this, it's peaking at -13. So I'm right there inside of my window. Now, if I open up my guitar software, let's have a look at what I'm doing in here. Now, my input is over here. That thing's set to 0. My output is over here. That thing is set to -4. So when I dialed up this amp sim, I guess what I was noticing was the output was coming out a little bit hot. So now that I have the amp sim engaged, let's see how our levels change. This is the guitar bus, so this is where the audio is going to be going. So with the amp sim engaged, we're adding, some dB there, and it's basically leaving the peaks somewhere around just a little bit above -10. So my Pro Tools is saying -9. The peaks here coming out of the guitar rig software is -9. And that's what's going to my mix bus. So I'm sending my peaks from that guitar channel to my mix bus at -9. And again, that's what's coming out of the plugin. What's going into the plugin is that. That's what's going into the plugin. So kind of peaking a little bit above -15 right there. So anyway, like I said, hotter is not better in this instance. You want to keep those peaks nice and low. And then either use a limiter on the mix bus during mixing or turn up your headphone amps during recording. Back to the video. So we've laid the solution out. Don't record hot, keep your peaks between -18 and -12, and if you do that, you'll be all set. Now, for those of you that care about the technical details, this is sort of my reasoning behind this. If you set aside digital systems for a minute and you look at old analog systems, the signal-to-noise ratio of, let's just say, 24-track, 2-inch tape recording is probably about 60 or 70 dB. You might get another 10 dB out of it with the noise reduction unit, but we're not talking about a massive signal-to-noise ratio. When you're talking about a digital system recording a 24-bit file, the signal-to-noise ratio is like 144 dB. We have more than double the signal-to-noise ratio that we have in a digital system compared to an analog system. Now, anyone who's recorded in an analog system will know this, but if you haven't, this is something to keep in mind. When you're recording to tape, you're trying to get your levels as close to peak, as close to clipping as possible without clipping. And in some instances, clipping the tape a little bit creates a certain tone, a certain sound, a certain vibe, a certain kind of distortion which people like. So you can even push tape a little bit into clipping and have it actually respond well. A digital system is not like this. You don't want to clip a digital system at all. These are two different mediums. They require two different approaches. The signal-to-noise ratio of a digital system is so wide, it's so broad, that you don't need to track hot. If you're recording your peaks at, let's just say you're recording them at -30, you still have over 100 dB before you hit the noise threshold. There's just no reason to overdo it. There's no reason to record your peaks into your workstations hot. Now, one thing I would say is the idea of recording your peaks between -18 and -12, this is sort of a personal preference of mine. I think you'd find a lot of engineers that would generally agree with this sentiment. But what I would say is you have a little bit of leeway here. If you're tracking your peaks a little bit hotter at like -10 or -8, that's probably not a problem. And if you're tracking your peaks down at -20, -25, maybe -30, that's probably also not a problem. What I would say, though, is you're better off giving yourself more headroom than you are pushing yourself too close to clip. There's just no reason to push that boundary in a digital system. And for those of you that are mixing, similar things apply. Personally, I don't like sending peaks to my mix bus that are higher than, let's just say, -8 or -6. I try not to send peaks very loud into the mix bus. I want to have plenty of headroom on my mix bus so I can do processing and not have to worry too much about causing clipping. So generally speaking, keep your levels down in your digital recordings. If you can't hear the recording that well, turn your headphone amplifiers up. That's just the quick and easy solution to this problem. I would be curious to know if anybody who's sort of newer to recording has any idea when this trend of recording your DI guitars hot, when that started. I would be curious to know. Part of me wonders if maybe outboard modelers, like the Neural DSP stuff or the quad core, or I don't know, maybe the Spark stuff, any of those digital boxes that aren't attached to a computer or that don't run off computer software. I wonder if maybe that's where the trend started. Maybe you're supposed to record into those units as hot as those units would tolerate, and maybe when people transferred over to actual like computer related recording, that thought process came along with it. I don't know. All I know is, I started using amp modelers basically when they came out, which is probably like maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. And I know for a fact back in those days, nobody was recommending that you record loud to those things. I was brought up in a digital recording environment to never track hot, and I had never seen a plugin spec that recommended you track hot. So just as a 40-year-old, I'd be curious to know what some of you 20 and 30-year-olds think as far as when this trend got started. But at the end of the day, I hope this video was helpful to some of you guys. I was really personally surprised to see so many people were surprised by this. I look at it sort of like an amplifier. Why would the input not matter? If I take a Marshall and I take my Strat and I plug my Strat in and I dial in a clean tone on the Marshall, and then I take a humbucker like a Les Paul or something and I plug it in instead of the Strat, my Marshall's no longer going to be clean. So the input that you're sending out of your guitar, off of your pedals, all that stuff, it matters with regard to how your amp is going to act. It's not exactly clear to me why people would think that recording into a digital system, the input wouldn't matter. But I think at the end of the day, mainly what people are worried about is accuracy. They want their amp models to be accurate compared to the real thing. And from my point of view, this is a very difficult thing to achieve. If I make my own preset for something and I'm using a Strat and I pass that preset off to someone and they're also using a Strat, but their pickups are hotter, the emulation is no longer accurate. If they keep their pickups, an eighth of an inch lower away from the strings than I do, it's not going to be accurate. If they're using an especially warm sounding preamp or I was using an especially clean sounding preamp, it's no longer going to be accurate. I never really viewed accuracy as something that was truly attainable. So I've always just used these things as tools to sort of just facilitate the creative process and just to get recordings done. It's not exactly clear to me why people want to get so hung up on accuracy. Anyway, I hope this was helpful to you guys. If you liked the video, shoot me a like and subscribe. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you again for another one soon.